Ben. Hey, how's it going, Ben?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. So I think I want to start with the first question that we kind of got in, which is, as far as what goes in a design system, um, would design systems include things like voice and tone and writing style, guide information?
Oh, heck yeah, this is great. This is a great question. So one of the things that, and actually in Ethan's talk, he kind of addressed some of this, but like the idea with the design system obviously is that it includes a whole lot more than just the sort of common patterns that most folks think about. I think Jasenia that Ethan referenced in his talk does this well when she describes it as a language. In the surveys that we've done, we've asked folks to select from sort of a list of tons of different things that we have found in our experience are typically included in systems or sometimes included in systems. And then we ask folks to say, in your system, how many of these things are included. And so we've got everything from like color systems, type systems, form components, all the way down to like, CSS, HTML, JavaScript code, grid systems, spacing systems, design files themselves, content blocks, accessibility guidelines, usage guidelines, just tons and tons of information. So um, all of those things are things that can be included. We try to like limit the definition to there has to be sort of usage guidelines for it to be a system, because it has to help folks on your team learn how to actually put it into practice.
Awesome, thank you. Um, do you have any software recommendations on what to use to create design systems?
Oh man, this is like a trick question. Uh, so there's because this is such a like a hot topic in the industry right now. There, everybody who does anything, every organization that creates any software for folks who do web work or digital work is thinking about this. So there are so many different types of software available. I'll be honest, we've been building systems for years now, like 3 or 4 years easily. And before that, we were thinking very systematically, about this before everybody was using the word design system. So, but in all of that time, I really don't think we've built the same kind of system twice. I mean, the part of the challenge here is that the organization where the system has to live is kind of like it's like a sourdough, right? Like you put uh, your own sort of DNA into it, right? And that's kind of what happens with a system. So in order for it to be successful, it has to function inside the context of that organization, which means it's hard to say there's a one size fits all solution. So I really don't have a bunch of software to recommend. I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions, right? The whole sort of gist of what I was trying to say in this presentation was really do the work to understand who is the audience and try to figure out how you can shape the system to show value to those folks, especially early on. And that's going to get you a lot of momentum. So a lot of times, that's going to be different for every organization.
Yeah, thank you. Um, was there ever a situation where a design system was not the right choice for one of our clients?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't want to get super specific here, but I can definitely actually one of the folks on our team wrote a blog post about this very specifically. So I'll make sure we get a link to that posted or tweeted out on the hashtag. But I think it's interesting. Design systems, depending on sort of your long-term goals with what you have planned, they can be incredibly helpful. They can also, like when we looked at that efficiency chart, it dipped way down at the beginning, right? And that's because there's a lot of work that has to go into getting them built. And it's your customers, like on the surface, don't see a tremendous amount of benefit from it, right? So if you have a functioning website now and you want to build a system, if what you do is take a lot of the things that exist on your existing site and move them into the system, the end result doesn't look any different to your customer. You might get a little bit more consistency, right? But I think it's, I think it's, I don't know. I feel like you have to sort of do the work to understand how many folks are going to be writing code, doing design on my team. That's a huge deal. One of the things that this helps with a lot is the scale side of things. So if you've got a lot of different folks with a lot of different ideas, a system can kind of help create some guidelines for your team. Um, So that's an area where we definitely look at it. But if it's just one or two folks and you're sitting in the same room and you can just have that conversation over your shoulder, sometimes it's going to take a lot more time and it's going to be really hard to justify. I think scale is really one of the things that we look for. The other benefits that we talk about, accessibility, those things can be handled. They have been handled in digital products for a long time, well, in some cases without systems. So it's not that you can't do them. It's a tricky one. It definitely takes some evaluation at each organization, at each product, whatever it is that you're doing.
Sounds like that's a big old it depends.
Always, right?
Yeah. um, so you talked a little bit about how design systems improve accessibility. Can you talk about how that actually happens and put a little meat on that for everybody?
Yeah, this is like one of the best, I think, one of the best motivators or benefits of systems. Like a lot of the stuff that we're working on with accessibility is about sort of creating really good experiences for folks who might have a disability of some kind. But what's cool is that when you do that work, you're also improving the experience for all the other users. So I think there's sort of like a tier of accessibility things that you can address kind of pretty programmatically. Like you can check to see, do all of my image tags have alt tags on them, or the appropriate ones, you know. But there's also a ton of things that you just can't check programmatically. So you have to have somebody in there reviewing those things. So a design system, if you're building that accessibility into components themselves, you get sort of a first tier pass of confidence in the components, at least that they have been tested for accessibility. And then as you evolve the product, as you add new features, as you reuse those components, you're going to see the benefit of that accessibility work sort of spread around your products and around your digital properties. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. The regression side of things is where I feel like in the world of accessibility, there's so many times that we've worked with clients where we do a lot of accessibility work up front, but when their team takes that over, if they don't have the same level of experience as they continue to evolve their products, they might reintroduce the same kinds of challenges. And so having a system means you're going to prevent a lot of the regressions from resurfacing. So that's a huge deal. And that's just work that's already been done. That's rework that your organization is going to have to do over and over again. So I think that's a huge part of it. I did want to just make sure we caution folks that like having all this stuff accessible in your system does not mean that the experiences you build when you construct a new experience or a new feature from existing patterns will be fully accessible. There's definitely still a level of sort of integration testing that has to happen. And the best way to do that is with folks using it, watching them, learning from the things that they're trying to do. That's how you create a better experience. So none of this is a silver bullet, you know.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, here's a softball for you. Ben,
Okay.
do you have any pets?
I do. I have a Vizsla. Actually, she's sleeping on the couch right over behind me. If she wakes up, I'll bring her on screen for everybody. She's a sweetie, but she's got so much energy. But she's a lover. She's about 55 pounds, and she thinks that she's a lap dog still. So occasionally she's up here with me.
Yeah, no, that's great. We've seen a lot of the different Sparkbox pets over the last couple of weeks, and
Yeah.
during one of our breaks coming up, we've got a slideshow with a whole bunch of pictures of all the Sparkbox pets coming. So
Yeah. Good
that'll be
question.
fun.
Whoever that was. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So Dean wants to know, how do you stress test a design system to find the weak points, the failure states, and all of that other stuff?
Ooh, wow. How do you stress test it to find failure points, weak points? Honestly, I think it's less about testing the system and more about talking to the folks who use it, probably. Um, I think I was trying to kind of hint at this in the presentation when I talked about, as you're talking about the system itself, make sure you're thinking about it as an enabler and not as a restrictor. A lot of the folks who have had systems now for a year or two, I've been having these really interesting conversations with folks who have more mature systems. And these have been fascinating because, we've all been sort of advocating for this kind of approach for the last few years. And now we kind of have systems that have been around for 3, 4, 5 years. And we're starting to learn a lot about what that means to like have it in place in an organization. And the big challenges that we're seeing are that in order to get these things live, we had to compromise. We had to make some compromises, creatively, technically, whatever. And so we did these things and we got them live. And now we're sort of dealing with some of that debt, that technical or creative debt. And a lot of times it's kind of around, how do I gather, inspiring ideas from these creative folks on my team who are really trying to do innovative new work, but they're trying to do that inside the context of a system. And they believe in sort of these ideas, these like ideals that we have around systems, and they want that to work, but they also have new problems they're trying to solve that maybe the system doesn't address. And I think this is really probably one of the trickiest things, is how do you set up a system, a process for governing these. I was talking with an organization, a massive financial organization, about this very problem. They've had a system for 2.5 years now, and they were just describing this, because it's a financial organization. They have very strong bent towards process, and they were describing this like 15-step process that they're about to roll out, which is what it takes for somebody who's a subscriber to their system to like have a new idea, design it, build it, test it, and then push it back into the system in some way, like for them to give back. And I was listening to this description and thinking, oh my goodness, this is so much, like, are we making it so hard for people to contribute back that they're just not going to do it, right? So I think there's this weird balance, you have to walk. I don't know the answer to this, like, I think there's a lot of work that we have to do to figure this out. We have had some success with some clients, where there's like just real buy-in from all the different folks involved. But I think that's kind of that's why I feel like the selling side of this is so critical, because if you haven't done the work to actually get people, bought into the idea, then it becomes really hard to convince them later that they have to do a little bit more legwork just to update the system. So I don't know. It's a tricky one. Good question.
Yeah. Okay. This is coming from an anonymous attendee. Mr. Anonymous is asking a lot of questions, as I previously mentioned. Ben, should a design system include JavaScript?
Yeah, this can be another, it depends. I feel like that's always the answer, though, because it literally depends. A lot of the systems, like, I think about it as like, there's like this spectrum, right? You have like everything from a static PDF that is just like some language around how to do design and some examples of how things should look. Think about like a brand standards guide, right? Something along those lines, all the way up to like a fully, integrated it's code that's sort of integrated into your build pipeline, right? You can just include something and all of a sudden you have access to all these beautiful patterns that are tested and proven. And as it evolves, you get release notes and you can kind of see what's new. It's a product essentially, right? So that's a very wide spectrum, from like a very static, here's how we think about things, all the way up to fully integrated, automated. And there are really good reasons to do all of these. The amount of effort it takes to get from here to here is tremendous, right? This is a lot of work over on this side, where you've got everything that you've got to have like every discipline very involved in making sure that this automation is working and that the right versions are being pulled in and all of those kinds of things. And somewhere in the middle, it's sort of like this ramp up for the amount of effort, because it's not too hard to build a little static PDF. But somewhere in the middle, there's like probably a sweet spot for a lot of organizations where it's maybe not fully automated, because that takes just the benefit there. Like, is it worth that little extra, the little extra benefit? Is it worth all that extra squeeze? And so like, this is what I meant when I said, like, we've never built the same thing twice. It's because every organization kind of has to do that work to figure out what they need. So I think in the current, I will, so that's my sort of it depends answer, but I'll also maybe take the bait a little bit. In today's climate, where there's like everything is being built these days with some JavaScript framework, it makes a lot of sense in my mind to sort of think about how the frameworks we're using are fairly component driven. And if in that world, it's possible to like do the work to think about not just the functionality, but also the interface and the experience that we're creating with these components. So I think there is a lot of reason to do that, to include JavaScript in the system. It's not going to work for everything. It's not going to work for every situation, but I think there's probably a a way to do that that makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, I love this question, um, because so much of what we've learned at Sparkbox and the work we do, we very much stand on the shoulders of giants. Like everything we know is based on work that's being done by all these tremendous people on the web, and that's one of the
Totally.
reasons we love to give back.
Yeah.
But anonymous person asks, who else in the industry should I look for in order to learn more about design systems? Who are you following, and who is out there like as a resource that we use a lot?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. There's so many. Goodness. I think Ethan mentioned Jasenia. She's fantastic. She's been doing this work for such a long time. Really, really bright. So much good content. Dan Mall is another he's another one of our good friends, and actually we'll be hearing from him a little bit later. I think he's been doing this work for a while as well, um, and has really sort of like focused in on this as a service. Folks like Brad Frost, who wrote early about atomic design, and even before that, Jeremy Keith, who talked about the idea of sort of like atoms as like a building block. These are folks who have been thinking about these things for a long time, and I think there's definitely like a I remember when, like when Ethan released responsive, the post on a list apart and did the talk at an event apart. There were a lot of folks who were thinking in very sort of fluid ways before that, and it wasn't. Ethan did a tremendous work to put all three of these concepts together, but there were a lot of folks who were thinking about each of those individual things independently, and he's the one that kind of tied them all together. And I think that's the same kind of thing that's happened, with design systems. Folks have been thinking systematically about design for as long as we've been doing design, especially on the web, because folks like you and me, who used to write all the code, right? Like we're a little bit lazy, so we're always looking for ways to make our job a little easier, and design systems can do that for us, right? We'll put a little bit of work in up front, and now I get the benefit of that over and over and over again as I continue to evolve a property of some kind. So there's so many people who have been thinking about this. I mean, Gina Bolton is another one that comes to mind. She was so early to this, and just out at Salesforce back in the day was like really doing incredible work. So much work with design tokens, thinking about like, how do we take a system that works well on the web and translate it to other digital, like native applications, or in-store kiosks, or whatever else it might be, right? Like, so there's these, what I'll do for this, because there's so many, is I will make a list and I will put that out on the Twitter hashtag. I think that's a great question. I just want to reiterate what Rob said, is that a lot of this stuff, it's standing on the shoulders of giants for sure. This is an industry where that is possible because so many folks are willing to share the things they're learning. So we love that.
Yeah, I know that's been a huge inspiration for even this event, is being able to share all the things we're learning, and giving credit to the people that we learn from, and
Yeah,
giving back because of that collective intelligence.
that's right. Yeah.
Such a huge part of it. So another question from John. How do you calculate the ROI on design systems?
Oh my goodness. Well, I told that quick story about one of our customers who, I'll give a little bit more detail on that one because it's a really good example. The situation there was very big organization. We had been working with them prior to the design system work, just redesigning a few sort of really core pages in their e-commerce experience. And as we did that work, we were thinking very systematically. That was just kind of how we worked at the time. And over the course of a year or two of work together, we ended up with a really good set of sort of reusable components, not really a system, but a pattern, a library of patterns, and then all along we were kind of saying, hey, this could be really good. And there were folks internally on their team who were totally bought into this idea of reuse, of guidelines, of all the different benefits that come from a system like that. And so eventually, when they had built up enough sort of internal momentum on sort of the ground level, they reached out and they said, let's actually do this. How do we get started here? So then we were able to work with them to build their first version of a design system. And it's 2 or 3 years in the making now. And there was a point where it sort of reached a budget threshold, the amount of money that they were spending on the design system effort sort of crossed some threshold, and somebody up a little higher up who was looking at budgets saw that number float through and said, hey, I'm not sure what this design system budget is. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is? We're trying to figure out if this is worth the investment. And so they had done some work kind of on the ground. They pushed this through. They got a bunch of good work done. They had a lot of internal folks subscribing to that system. And then somebody above said, hey, is it worth it? And so they were sort of put in the situation where they had to go back and prove that ROI. So what they did is they went to a handful of subscribers, folks who were using the system, and they said, do you remember that project we did where you used the system? I'd like you to imagine what it would have cost you to do that work without the system. That's not, I know that's a hard thing to do, but like, give us your best guess. And then they put all that stuff together into a spreadsheet, did all the calculations. They got a handful of those kinds of estimates back, and they learned that 3-to-1 number. So they, for them at least, in their context, the folks who came back, the average was that for every dollar they spent on the design system, they were getting $3 back in efficiency. And that's just that one. That's just that one benefit, efficiency. So that doesn't talk about, that's not them doing the calculation on all the accessibility regressions that might have happened, or who knows, like the stuff that's really hard to measure, like, you know, brand loyalty through trust by having more consistent experiences. That stuff is really hard to measure, you know. And so that's one thing that you can look at. Efficiency is probably the one that's easiest to measure. Because you can look at how much work your team can get done before you have the system, and then you can look at how much work they can get done after. That growth one, the idea of onboarding, is another one, because growth, you know, Rob and I talk about this all the time, just in our little world at Sparkbox, is like, for us to choose to grow in a given year, it costs us a lot of money. It just takes money to grow an organization. That's just how it works. And so being able to demonstrate that folks can come up to speed faster is a huge deal to those folks. And I think that's one way that I don't think many people are even thinking a lot about that right now, but that's a good way to measure, a good thing that could be easy to measure. I don't know. Those are the ones that come to mind right away.
Yeah, thank you. From Anonymous, when you build a design system for a client, do you start from a template or boilerplate, or do you custom create them something based on their needs?
Yeah. We have done enough of these kinds. So when we started, it was kind of like custom every time, you know, but we've done enough projects now that we're starting to like think through what those, like, what is the starting point that we need? I think it would be easy to look at, and some folks have done this, you know, already, but like, to look at the common things that kind of exist inside every, especially if you're focused on the web, like every website has to have some kind of typography, color definition, and things like that. You know, we talked about buttons earlier, and that's just like the standard example, right? So those kinds of things are easy to include, right? And it would be simple to go through and create just a bit of markup that is like, here's all the things that we have to make sure we think about, as like a very, very baseline experience. But there's a lot more to design systems than just those components, those little reusable chunks. So like putting in placeholders in some sort of starter kit for things around guidelines and accessibility, or here's the user experience process that we go through, like to test and make sure that the things we're building are good, are usable. There's lots of things like that. Voice and tone would be a thing, you know. You could start to have some sections that are a little bit more generic that get refined for an organization. And I think having something like that could be really helpful as you go in, to help people understand what a system is, even if you haven't done all the work to figure out what should live inside those. Having those as placeholders helps people to see, oh, you're going to do a lot more than just have reusable code. This is for more than just the designers or just the developers. It could be for all the product folks, right? It could be for the whole team. So I think there's benefit there. For us, we're slowly moving towards that. I think there isn't like some like publicly available repo that I can send you to that has everything you need, right? But it's a combination of being smart about starting with the basics, and also doing the work to understand what a client might need or what your team needs.
Wow, thank you. I think that's trying to keep things on track today. That's the time we have for questions. There are several questions we didn't get to. Those are all being captured. If you put your name on those, we will get you an answer, and we'll have all of this section, published as well. Let me get this shared. And if you're looking for more, we love talking about this kind of work. If you have questions we didn't get to, grab some time with Ben. There's a form here that you can follow that link. You can actually schedule some time with Ben to talk about this stuff. Um, that's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to, he's looking forward to getting his calendar filled up with all these conversations. Like I said, we love talking about this stuff. And as Ben mentioned, we are totally looking for more people to complete the design system survey. There's a link to that as well. Take it. Um, if you spend the time to do this, we will totally take that data. We will share all that stuff out with everybody on the web again. This has become a really good resource for us to kind of follow these trends and all of that. Ben, any last words?
I mean, thank you to everybody for attending. It's a lot of fun. This is stuff we love, as Rob said. So I'm serious about that link. So go to that little bit.ly and sign up. I would love to talk to you. Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. Thank you, Ben.